John, Simon, Andy, Roger and Nick. They were names that we would associate with the Fantastic Five as we were teenagers growing up in our little suburban households in Australia back in the early 1980s. They are, of course, Duran Duran. They've been responsible for 12 top 20 singles in Australia. They've sold 100 million and plus albums worldwide. Currently sitting in, I think, lounging about a chair in the desert in Las Vegas is one member of Duran Duran. John Taylor, good morning, or I should say good afternoon to you.
Well, good morning to you.
It's a pleasure to talk to you, sir.
Yeah, always.
Started off in 1981 with your first release, your first album release, which gave us songs like Planet Earth and Girls on Film, and also a rather controversial video clip with Girls on Film. We've come a long way since then to now with the way we use digital technology, online downloads. How have you guys weathered that change in the industry over 30 plus years?
Ooh, that's a big question to start the day with. Well, actually, I don't tend to give it too much thought. I kind of think that songwriting at the end of the day is kind of timeless. There's things that we like about songs and the way that songs are sung that are never going to change, never going to go out of style. I'm very passionate about music. We all are in Duran Duran. We just keep that passion alive. And I think that as a side product of that, if you're in a commercial, our band is also a commercial venture, so it's in our interest to sort of keep our ears to what's happening musically, what's happening stylistically, So we kind of we're not in a vacuum. I think that's the worst thing that can happen. But as to the delivery systems, as I call them, it's like you can't really afford to get too hung up on that. Like you said, in the 30 years we've been in business, there've been so many different formats. You just got to go with it. We just released this new album, Paper Gods, and the thing is, for us, we're still turned on by the idea of an album. Now, I know for a lot of young people today, it's like there's no validity to that idea. People are into songs; they don't listen to albums. That's my conditioning, and I insist, we all insist, that's what we do. We make albums, and so, that to a degree perhaps is a little old-fashioned of us.
Oh, but it's perfectly old-fashioned.
That's what drives us.
And those albums, as you refer to, have been the soundtrack to a generation or more. So, Duran Duran in 1981, Rio in 1982, Seven and the Ragged Tiger, which I have to confess my favourite of your albums, in 1983, Arena in 1984. Sorry.
The Australian album, Seven and the Ragged Tiger, a lot of that was recorded in Sydney, yeah.
That's probably why it sounded so good, mate.
There you go, that's it. Yeah.
You've worked on a number of side projects, but you guys have always sort of had this incredible, I want to call it a marriage, it's a musical marriage, 34, 35 years or longer. Yeah. It's an incredibly long relationship to have with a number of other people.
It is.
How has that been maintained? Do you have your moments where you all go off and have quiet time in a cottage somewhere, or you just gather together at certain times of the year to write, or is it just something a bit more organic?
Well, I think it's true that we all take, independently, we all have to find ways of, keeping, we do have to take breaks from each other, and that time apart is very important. We've got to want to be with each other, we've got to want this relationship, and we've worked really hard at it over the years. I think that in some ways that one way of describing the new music is that it is a snapshot into our relationships, and it's quite a fine mesh of yes, we're brothers, friends, bandmates. We've been through a lot together, and there's a lot of energy, good and bad, and that all has to be processed. And that's what turns out the stew that is the music. But that's for me, I find that quite interesting. I think you've kind of for me, I'm quite into psychology, and in large part because I understand that what really makes this band tick, what makes this band, either successful or not successful on any given day, is the way that we're getting along. And so it's almost like if we take care of our relationships, the music will take care of itself.
Indeed. This is your 14th studio album, Paper Gods, that you mentioned. There's yourself, Simon, Nick and Roger. Produced by Mark Ronson, but also with Nile Rodgers, who I think you first worked with almost 30 years ago. Is that like almost going home, working with Nile?
Well, what was interesting about it was working with Nile Rodgers and Mark Ronson together. Mark had done the last album with us. He's a new friend, shall we say.
Yes.
Niall, we became friends in the mid-'80s, and we did a couple of great records with him. But Niall has had this tremendous renaissance in the last few years since he played on the Daft Punk Get Lucky track, and he put his sound back in the forefront of popular music. It was actually Mark's idea that we call Niall and ask him if he would like to come and participate in the sessions for this album. We got together for a couple of days. Mark's got a studio in London, and the fruits of those sessions included the basis for what became the current single, which is Pressure Off. We've also got Mr. Hudson, Ben Hudson. He's the third producer on this album.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, he's responsible for a much bigger share of the music. But Niall and Mark are the headline names, the big marquee names that are on this album. I think people are intrigued to hear what they do when they work together. It was a trip. It felt really good. It felt like a dream team, to be honest. And we've been very lucky on this record. A lot of people have stepped up, to play or to produce for the band on this album. And I think it's the first time we really stepped back and just opened our hearts and minds to letting people in, And I mean, the first two songs on the album, they both lead off with singers other than Simon. Simon's been very generous on this album. He stepped aside a lot to let in other singers for the sake of the sound of the band. So we got to tell a much deeper story, much more. We got to take a more varied journey on this album. As a result of that, as a result of letting in other instrumentalists and other singers.
Well, is there a challenge with being around these guys for so long? You mentioned there's the headline names on this album are Rodgers and Ronson. I would suggest that a couple of Taylors, a Rhodes and a Le Bon might be some headline names on the album above those two producers. Are there challenges with the guys that you do you have creative challenges? Do you have moments where you sort of look at Simon or Nick or Roger and go, that's just rubbish, guys?
Well, of course. I mean, you don't agree on everything. I mean, everybody has a different. You're just constantly trying to get the stars to align. I mean, I think you have to have the right attitude. You have to bring the right attitude to the studio, and the attitude is one of collaboration. So it's not about, okay, this is what I want and this is how it's going to be. That's not going to work. It's like, okay, how do we all? What's really important at the end of every day is that everybody leaves feeling like something got done. And clearly there's still a belief in the talent that we share, or else we wouldn't be here. We showed up every day for almost 2 years on this album because we all believe that we have we still have the potential to make music that's worthwhile. If we thought we were flogging a dead horse, I think we would be doing other things. But I think there's a feeling that there's still an untapped something, some magic in that. There's a great belief for me, a belief in those other three guys and what they're capable of that is still been, that is still yet to come,
Yeah.
And I think, we could all say that, because, when you're in a pop group in your early 20s, and it's all, like, your career is really front-loaded, you know, and then you become this like legacy act, and everybody's saying, "Oh, your best years are behind you." It's all about you're on this like nostalgia circuit, you know. How many people out there really believe, like, you know, whether it's us or Spandau Ballet or, you know, I mean, who knows? Any group or, you know, Boy George, whatever, from particular. How many people out there really believe that those guys, you know, have the potential to do something really meaningful again? You know, I don't know how many people out there believe that we have the capacity to do that, but we in the band, we ourselves, we do, and that's what keeps us coming back. You know, and you know, we're like our studio is like the laboratory. You know, we're just like showing up every day, just trying to find the magic formula. And if I say so myself, I feel pretty good about this new record. I feel like
you may indeed.
I feel like we've pulled something off. You know, that kind of actually does speak to anybody that ever liked a Duran record, for starters.
Good. I'm so excited to get hold of this. You talked about, I just want to touch back on that sort of retro idea for a second. I want to put some names in front of you. Go West, Nick Kershaw, Paul Young, The Cutting Crew, all performed a concert right here in Melbourne last night. And there's a lot of talk about that whole retro 80s thing is very, very now, like we did the 70s once before. But the last couple of albums, so Red Carpet Massacre in 07 and All You Need Is Now from 2011, were sort of right on the pulse of where music is at. So there's no reliance on that retro. Obviously, the old stuff is important, but it's not how you shape the rest of your career, is it?
Well, I think we've been lucky, and we haven't had to. We haven't been forced by, you know, circumstances to seriously consider that kind of a touring situation. We've got enough songs that have enabled us to always put on our own shows, and you know, we're just very driven. We're still very ambitious, and you know, and we've always looked to artists that keep changing. You know, that keep, you know, whether it's Prince or Bowie or what the Beatles did. You know, where every album is different. You know, and you're just constantly trying to. It's through reinvention. You know, if you just sit back and just start doing the same old thing, you're really limiting your the potential, I think. You know, so
indeed.
And, you know, we're excited by musical. You know, we're excited to make a 21st century to make 21st century music. I mean, actually, the last album, All You Need Is Now, which was produced by Mark Ronson. Mark had a vision, you know, and his sort of production concept for that album was that we would go back to the sounds of Rio, and we would use all the same instruments, you know, all the same, you know, recording effects to make an album that almost felt like it was like a partner record to that particular album, you know, which is not the kind of thing that typically we would do. But the album before that, you mentioned Red Carpet Massacre, we'd done with Timbaland, and it was an almost entirely electro record where there was almost, if you'd have taken Simon Le Bon's voice off it, you would never have guessed that it was a Duran record.
It was a very different album.
So because we'd gone that far out on that album, when Mark then suggested, hey, well, what about doing like a retro feel for this one, we were like, okay. But I think that both of those records, the experience of making both of those records, sort of gave us a sense. It allowed us to plot a course for this one that was both classic Duran and experimental contemporary, and get that balance right.
John Taylor, one final question before I let you go. I know we've got a very limited time. When are you touring back in Australia, and can I get you and Nick at least to come and sit in the studio and have this conversation with us?
Yeah. Oh man, we've always had such an amazing time in Australia. We're talking about next year. You know, the album's so far so good. You know, it seems to be received very well down there, and we're talking about next year. We're talking about, there's a couple of different time frames that we're talking about, but we are definitely going to be coming down next year for sure.
Excellent. It'll be great to see you and to have you in the studio with us. John Taylor from Duran Duran. Enjoy Vegas, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. That's John Taylor from Duran Duran. We'll be in Australia next year, and the new album, as we mentioned in the interview, is a fantastic album. It's called Paper Gods, and it is available through Warner Music. Thank you to them for this interview this morning. You're on Saturday Magazine here on Joy 94.9. We'll be back with more very shortly.